This week we've got Alex. He's been in the graduate department. He's very close to getting his PhD, if I'm correct. Reasonably so. And he's done a lot of work in tropical meteorology. So he has something tropical to talk about today, of course. We have Nicole and the forecast for the upcoming weekend. So.
Actually, a fair number of interesting things. Not necessarily here, fortunately. The weather here is going to be relatively nice and calm, but interesting things around the globe, many of which are tropical cyclone related. So looking at Nicole is currently exiting Bermuda. I mean, last time I checked, there were currently still hurricane force gusts there on the back side of the storm, gusts to 93 at the Bermuda airport. The highest, at least from the hurricane center, the highest gust I've seen during the passage was 119 miles per hour. Of course, there could be higher at locations that didn't have a recording station. But this is the current radar of the storm, and you can see Nicole moving off to the northeast, and also the fact that the northern eye wall is substantially more robust than the southern eye wall, if you can even call this. I mean, I guess you could still call it that, but there's not a whole lot of convection there. And that's generally consistent with storms moving northeastward in a region of southwesterly shear in the mid-latitudes, but it's still it is still an intense storm, and certainly has been impacting Bermuda as an intense storm. It unexpectedly reached Category 4 intensity last night with winds as high as 130 miles per hour, and then weakened slightly upon its approach to Bermuda. The pressure rose about 10 millibars, and then the maximum sustained winds decreased from 130 to roughly around 120, but it was still a major hurricane as it passed by the island. Now, it didn't probably officially make landfall in Bermuda. It likely, although I'm sure they'll have to do a best track and figure out where exactly the center went. But in terms of its effects on Bermuda, that's largely academic. Actually, it's truly academic in the general meaning of the term. But because Bermuda did get the most powerful northern eye wall as the storm was passing, radar, we'll pull up the slide just and we'll be going back and forth a lot. This is a radar image from this morning where Bermuda is really in the strongest conditions within the storm, that northern eye wall. So during the next couple days, Nicole is going to continue moving northeastward and continue to weaken as expected in the mid-latitudes and undergo extratropical transition and eventually become a rather intense mid-latitude cyclone. So this is just the current 12Z GFS forecast. Nicole's, of course, this 992 millibar low near Bermuda. It moves northeastward. And of course, 992 is the poor resolution surf pressure. The real pressure is in the low 960s right now. But the storm will continue moving northeastward and eventually undergo ET. And because there's a fair amount of blocking in the North Atlantic, it's not going to move particularly quickly after this. So we can see that at least in this forecast, most of the other models show similar qualitative things, that it's going to just sort of sit out there in the central Atlantic for a couple days before it eventually gets kicked off eastward. Although if you believe this forecast, which I think probably it's best not to, but it's still a possible scenario, the eventual circulation gets kicked down through the Azores and then toward North Africa. But one thing that's interesting is that even though the official forecast for Nicole is for it to undergo ET in the next couple days, ET, extratropical transition, of course, we like to divide our storms neatly into tropical, extratropical, and subtropical. Of course, nature doesn't follow those dictates. That if you look on the satellite image, it becomes what looks like extratropical. The convection becomes very down shear, and it becomes very asymmetric. But then, as it sort of stalls over the North Atlantic, it looks like it may become tropical again. Now it's just this one model in the satellite image from the GFS forecast. But it'll be interesting to see if in 5 days or so, if Nicole to some extent regains tropical characteristics, and if so, whether it's officially designated to have regained tropical characteristics. So that's just something to keep in mind. And Nicole also has the distinction of officially making this year an above average season. The powers that be, whoever they're, dictated that for an Atlantic hurricane season to be above average, it has to have an accumulated cyclone energy of at least 111, along with a couple of other factors. And accumulated cyclone energy is simply related to the sum of the square of the wind speed, maximum sustained winds, at all points of all storms, of all points of the life cycle of all storms of tropical cyclone intensity or greater. So you just sum that up to get an ACE for the year. You can get an ACE for an individual storm and then add it up to get the ACE for the year. And so this year's ACE is approaching around 120. So we've passed the threshold for an above active season on ACE, but you also have to have 2 of the following 3 criteria: 13 or more tropical storms, 7 or more hurricanes, and 3 or more major hurricanes. And as of yesterday, we were at 14 tropical storms, 6 hurricanes, and 2 major hurricanes. So we had achieved the threshold for tropical storms, but not hurricanes or major hurricanes. But with Nicole becoming a major hurricane as of yesterday, we officially reached the second of the 3 criteria, which is sufficient to have the season designated as above average, even if, in theory, Nicole disappeared right now and nothing else formed. So it's important because this is after 3 very quiet years of 2013 through 2015, this year has been, as the forecasters were generally predicting, substantially more active in terms of both number of tropical cyclones, but more importantly, the total energy of the storms. I think the last 3 years were something like 40, 67, and 60 in terms of accumulated cyclone energy, and then this year is roughly right now around 119. So it's substantially more. So moving a little bit closer to home, looking at the weather for our area, it's nice because it's what it says, tropical tidbits, but it's really mid-latitude tidbits as well. If you look at the weather for our area, the showers this morning were associated with a frontal passage through the area, which of course also associated with a wind shift, and in our case, cooling temperatures. So today it'll generally, the showers of course have ended. Temperatures will be getting a little bit cooler throughout the day. And then tonight it'll cool down a fair amount to around, probably the upper 30s. It looks like that, we're not really in danger of it getting below freezing tonight. And I would caution with this sort of discussion that it's not my wheelhouse, so I do much more on tropical. So if I say something regarding our weather because it sounds absurd or counterintuitive, it's probably me, not some unique insight I have. The temperatures will cool into the upper 30s. And I think the official forecast low is 37, and then an area of high pressure behind the front will move in for Friday and Saturday, which is quite nice. It looks like the weather is going to be really nice during the weekend, maybe seasonably cool, but by no means cold or anything. It's it's going to be probably upper 50s on Friday, and then as the high moves more directly over us, it'll warm slightly on Saturday, high in the low 60s. And then Friday night, it could get reasonably cold. I think they're saying that it's going substantial nocturnal cooling and relatively low wind as the high settles right over us. Of course, there's no real pressure gradient there, so the calmer winds and thus more nocturnal cooling. And so there is an outside chance we could get to freezing on Friday night into Saturday. I think the official low right now is 34. But of course, the margin for error, there's a slight possibility. There's a possibility we could get down there, maybe more than slight, but it certainly could happen. And that's pretty normal for this time of year. I think listening to Kyle and some of the other folks talk about the climatology while I was working up here yesterday, I think the mean date or median date, or I think it's roughly around this, for the first day at 32 or below is October 12th or 13th, so we're right after that. So it's not, it would not be unusual to get a low at freezing if it happens to get that low on Friday night. But on to Saturday and then Sunday, temperatures will warm. As I said, Saturday's high will be in the low 60s likely, and then the low will be substantially warmer, like expected to be in probably the mid 40s. And then Sunday will be yet warmer. That that as there's a southerly flow with substantial warm advection out ahead of another kind of weak frontal system, that the temperatures will be warmer, that likely to be in the mid-upper 60s, and then Sunday night low, it'll cloud over, and lows probably staying in the mid-50s. So substantially above average relative to climatology, at least by Sunday. And then the next chance of precipitation will come late Sunday night, quite possibly the night between Sunday and Monday, so Sunday night, early Monday morning, associated with, like I said, a weak frontal system that will move through. Not really associated with very much of a change in temperature, but there will be but there will be some precipitation associated with it. If you look at the 500 millibar vorticity, see, there's a little piece of energy away from the main vorticity that will kind of slide through the area that will bring an enhanced chance of rain. And it looks like it will be nothing terribly heavy. Last night, the GFS was kind of the deterministic GFS at least was suggesting more precipitation. I think I had it down to suggesting over an inch. But since then, the 6Z and then 12Z have shown progressively less. I think the 6Z had about 0.5 to 3/4 of an inch, and then the 12Z had less than half an inch. And the ensembles have been more in line with the 12Z, suggesting that it will be non-negligible precipitation, but it won't by any means be a gully washer, and most of it will likely occur at night. This is the 24-hour accumulated precipitation. So you see, I think we're in between the 0.3 and 0.4, at least for the deterministic forecast. And the ensembles have generally something similar. If you looking at that'd be the GEFS plumes. If we go to State College, then let's see, where are so yeah, the 6Z ensembles are suggesting, around the Sunday night into Monday, anywhere from very little to upward to 0.6 inches in terms of rain. So nothing, not negligible, but not anything too substantial. Probably have rain jacket or an umbrella with you Sunday evening into early Monday, but nothing pretty garden variety. Well, I guess not really garden variety because gardens are harvested nowadays, but pretty ordinary rain. Not a whole lot of interesting weather. The good news is that after that little bit of rain, it looks like, and good news if you like warmth, I guess, temperatures are going to increase again. That they're going to be above normal through likely the middle of next week. So I mean, this just, I don't look at the actual values, but just sort of the qualitative forecast. And this is Monday through Tuesday and then Wednesday, that the anomalies are definitely above average throughout the early to middle of next week. And then it looks like, at least within this deterministic forecast, another front comes through. But of course, this is a week out, so the timing of that and the intensity of it is, of course, remains to be determined. And this is just a single model. Now one of the takeaways from our weather, I'd say, are it'll be cooling a little bit this afternoon with the frontal passage, getting into the 30s tonight, low, and then Friday through Sunday will be, especially Friday and Saturday, will be quite nice. That highs on Friday in the likely the upper 50s and sunny, and then Saturday also it'll be a little bit warmer, low 60s and sunny. But then the coolest night will probably be Friday night into Saturday morning, as the high moves more directly over us, and there's very little wind from that. Of course, because the high is directly over us, very little wind, more nocturnal cooling. And the expected low is around 34. I didn't see any of the guidance that suggested we'd get below freezing, but of course temperature guidance is somewhat somewhat difficult to interpret, and I am not that good at interpreting it. So suffice to say that it's going to be rather chilly, but not tremendously so. I mean, just looking at the weather channel there, they're saying that 37 also Friday night to Saturday, which I think would be reasonable. So cool, chilly on Friday. Yeah, chilly tonight and Friday night, and then less so in subsequent nights. Now, there's a lot of other interesting weather to talk about, not the least of which is in the Pacific Northwest. They're experiencing a parade of storms, one of which is actually going to be energized somewhat by the remnants of Typhoon Songda from the Pacific. If we go to probably have to start in the West Pacific, actually. And the best way to track it is probably through the low-level vorticity. So this is the remnants of Typhoon Songda up here that at one time was with the equivalent of a major hurricane I think it may have actually achieved super typhoon status at one point, which is roughly equivalent to a high-end Category 4 hurricane or above. And then it, of course, recurved and it underwent extratropical transition, but there's still a substantial amount of vorticity associated with it south of the Aleutians. Now, if we go forward in time, we're going to have to change our domain. If we go to the northern hemisphere, so we stay in the same domain. We may not be able to look at vorticity here, so let's go to the Central Pacific. And then this is the cyclone. This is the sea level pressure in 500 heights. And so you can track the low associated with the remnants of Songda up through the Pacific, through the Pacific and up toward the Pacific Northwest. And it's expected to strengthen upon approach to the Pacific Northwest and actually deliver substantial winds and rain to that area. The GFS has it heading toward the Olympic Peninsula as a 972 low. The 0Z Euro had it a little bit farther south, I think. Actually, not a whole lot farther south, but near the Oregon-Washington border. And then the latest Canadian run has it roughly in the same region, the Olympic Peninsula. So, and that's actually a little bit south in general of where the runs have had it earlier, which had it going more up north toward Vancouver Island in Canada. And that's important for Washington State because if the storm does not go farther north but affects them more directly, there's going to be greater threat for wind damage, power outage, and that sort of thing. Just taking a clip from the discussion from the forecast office this morning in Seattle said, I mean, you can read it here as well, but basically they're saying that the typhoon is going to directly be energizing a system that's going to move into the Pacific Northwest, and that and another discussion earlier, it said that the wind threat is going to depend substantially on the track, that if it tracks farther north, it's going to be a rather ordinary storm of the type they see a couple times every winter. But if it takes a more southerly track, as indicated by the ACMWF and a little bit more of the other models as well, then there's going to be really the substantial chance for more wind damage along the immediate Washington and maybe even Oregon coasts, as well as possibly in areas that the wind can reach farther inland if applicable. This is certainly a precedented event. This sort of thing has happened before. If any of you are, and this time of year as well, it's to the extent that it's common at any time, it's relatively common in mid-October. The Columbus Day storm of 1962 was also the remnants of a typhoon that moved all the way across the Pacific, then had really substantial impacts along the Oregon and Washington coast. So typhoons can and do get, of course, as extratropical cyclones, get all the way across the Pacific and impact the Northwest, just as Atlantic hurricanes can recurve, undergo extratropical transition, and affect the British Isles or other parts of Europe. So this is something to keep in mind. This is actually, if I can take a moment just to talk of how it can affect me. This is important, not just the fact that it's a big storm, but all this rain in the Northwest. Because my stepfamily owns a potato farm up in Skagit County, Washington, which is right where this cursor is. And the potatoes are interesting because they're ready to harvest in October, but they can stay in the ground really until for months if you want to keep them in the ground before you harvest them. But they can only stay out of the ground a certain amount of time. And furthermore, potatoes are most valuable around Thanksgiving and Christmas because that's the time of year that people consume the most potatoes. So it's a tricky business because, of course, the rain tends to start in October, especially this year. And if you don't take the potatoes out soon enough, they'll rot and they're worthless. But if you take them out sooner than Thanksgiving, Christmas time, you're not going to get as much value as you could. So it's a real balancing act in terms of when to harvest the potatoes. And my mom texted me, she actually lives up there now near the farm, that they're worried about this rain, about harvesting the potatoes, because they don't quite know exactly what the optimal decision is. But it certainly looks like it's going to be very rainy there. And so let's see if I can go to the precip forecast. That, let's go back to the GFS. That, during the next week or so, certain areas with higher elevations, at least 16 to, at least over a foot of QPF. But then even near the Puget Sound, which is usually in something of a rain shadow with the Olympic Peninsula and the Vancouver Island to the west, they're still going to expect it to get a substantial amount of rain in the light purple and purple, which is anywhere between 2 and 5 inches. So if I were advising them, I don't know that much about potatoes, but I'd advise them if they're going to get a lot of rain, so they might want to dig them up because you certainly wouldn't want them to rot. But you guys do not care about potatoes; you care about the weather. So we will continue. We might care about potatoes. So we'll continue this parade around the globe, and it looks like there's going to be 2 tropical cyclones developing, at least 2 in the Western Pacific, headed for the Philippines. So let's go to the anomaly. So there's already a tropical cyclone. I don't think it has a name yet. I think it probably will by the end of the day. That's expected to track through the Philippines and then towards southern China or Vietnam. And then behind it, another storm is expected to form and actually become quite intense and head toward the Philippines. And if you remember, from the last couple of years, I think there's been a number of strong typhoons that have affected the Philippines this time of year into November. Of course, Haiyan was the most famous and most devastating one. But this is reasonably common to have these southern east to west typhoon tracks during this time of year. It's rather climatologically normal, although it's still, of course, a great hazard to the people there. If just for amusement purposes only, if you believe the surface pressure forecast, which you should not, but I still think it's notable to see in a model, you actually get a surface pressure forecast for the second storm of 884 millibars here, which do not trust the fact that they're forecasting 884 millibars. However, you should see that this model, and then also the European model, and then also the Canadian model, which isn't out there yet. But they're all forecasting an intense typhoon headed for the central or northern Philippines. So probably more the northern Philippines. So that's something to definitely keep in mind. And of course, the exact intensity track is hard to determine. This is 6.5 days out. But it's quite likely that there will be a strong typhoon affecting the Philippines, and then another typhoon farther west after affecting the Philippines is a weaker system likely to move towards southern China. I think this is the island of Hainan, and then toward Vietnam. So this is entirely consistent with climatology. There often are strong typhoons in that area this time of year, especially in a year that is, even though not an official La Nina, sort of a quasi La Nina, that you tend to get the warmer water somewhat shunted farther to the west, so you tend to get storms. The warm pool gets shifted, so the Philippines, of course, a region that can get impacted there. Now, in terms of other possible tropical development in the Atlantic, of course, there's this time of year, the real region to focus on is the Western Caribbean. And some of the models for the last few days have been suggesting that there would be something that would develop in the Western Caribbean. Of course, however, at least in the past couple runs, the deterministic GFS and seems to have backed off on it somewhat. And the European has never really had any sort of intense tropical cyclone developing in the Western Caribbean. So this is the 12Z forecast. You see that there's a fair amount of vorticity in the Southern Caribbean, but because of the 500 millibar trough out to its northeast over the Western Atlantic, the vorticity kind of gets strung up and is strung out and is never able to consolidate into a tropical cyclone. Whereas if you compare it to the 0Z forecast from last night, this morning, that it stays a little bit farther west and is able to concentrate, and then where it moves we're not able to stay at that point, so don't focus on that. But so there's still certainly the possibility that something in the Western Caribbean could develop. It's just that it might not be able to develop because the vorticity might not be able to get concentrated due to a 500 millibar trough to the northeast. So if you look at the 500 millibar, actually the 500 millibar vorticity, heightened vorticity is the most useful way to look at this. That you see that there's this trough ends up developing off the west in the Western Atlantic it kind of prevents the vorticity in the Western Caribbean. Wait, no, this is the 0Z. Yeah, it prevents the vorticity in the Western Caribbean from getting concentrated, and then draws it up into itself. And then, of course, there's another big trough that heads toward the East Coast, which could be relevant for next week's discussion in terms of the weather for the Ohio State game. However, given that this is a 210-hour forecast, I think it would be somewhat malpractice to go into any detail on that, save to keep it in mind. So that's roughly about, I guess I should touch on the flooding in North Carolina as well, that most of the rivers already have crested, however, some have not yet. For example, I guess, which river is this? I think it's the Neuse River at Kinston. Kinston is expected to crest in I guess the next couple days. And many of these rivers are expected to remain above major flood stage for another couple days as well. So even if the river is officially crested, that by no means signifies that the hazard is over or the flooding's over. So this is really I don't want to say it's unexpected threat because the rain was forecasted, but in terms of disaster communication, I think there was certainly a lot of focus on Florida, but less in terms of the rainfall threat in North Carolina, and that really caught a lot of the public off guard. But that's about all I have in terms of weather. The upshot here is that it's going to be pretty nice this weekend. Could get reasonably cool, but not terribly cold tonight and Friday night into Saturday, and then warming up next week with a chance of rain on Sunday night into early Monday, and then various interesting tropical stuff going around the globe as well. But happy to take any questions if you're interested. Yeah.
In the North Carolina map, I'm just curious, what's the 1 day total? Like, what's the maximum?
I don't, obviously it gets saturated above 10 inches here, but at least this icon here is suggesting that they got more than 12 inches in this part of eastern North Carolina.
Yeah, that was it. Fayetteville got 18.
Yeah, there was.
Storm total was over 18.
So yeah, so that would probably be roughly 1.5 foot is probably.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Next week will be Paul Knight will be coming in and giving his outlook for the upcoming winter.
I think there's some girls.
I don't know. I hope it's good.
There'll be something. Thank you.
There's something will be.
You know, corn.
Don't know what it is.